the eternal voice.
If you're arriving at night, breathe with me quietly. Touch the subscribe button if you must. Stay within the circle so you're found again when the tide returns. Tonight, we open a file that should not be opened. It is small, made of paper, salt-stained at the edges, threaded with ink, dreams, and the weight of forbidden knowledge. It promises an answer to a question you haven't asked yet. What calls you when you dream of water and impossible cities? The file names its call. The name is a sigil, a mask, a key, and gate at once. Say it, and your breath shortens. Read it, and the idea reads you back. A simple premise haunts these pages. There is a sleeper beneath the sea. But cosmic horror never deals in simple things. Knowledge is a current. It carries you whether or not you kick. In the hush between lamp and darkness, between curtain and stage, this story suggests that certain thoughts are not thought by you. They think you. They move through people as fog moves across a harbor, leaving salt on glass and a pattern of wakes you cannot map until it's too late. The manuscript whispers of vast intelligences that dream in oceanic depths, their consciousness seeping upward through layers of water and time, finding purchase in minds receptive to frequencies older than human language. We will follow a path carved in scholarly breadcrumbs and atmospheric dread. A sculptor's fevered clay, a swamp masked with drums, a sailor's star-blind log. We will track how a word crosses languages, how a sign scratched in damp plaster changes hands, how a city lifts like a bruise from the ocean. We will treat fiction like scholarship and scholarship like myth, for that is the trick. Lovecraft built his stage from footnotes and fog, creating a pseudo-academic apparatus that makes the impossible feel peer-reviewed. His genius lay not in inventing monsters, but in constructing methodologies, ways of making the unreal feel documented, the alien feel researched, the cosmic feel academically verified through careful accumulation of evidence. The story operates as both entertainment and philosophical weapon, designed to alter perception through gradual exposure to ideas that exceed normal processing capacity. Each document within the narrative, professor's notes, police reports, sailor's testimony, serves as step in a carefully constructed argument that reality operates according to principles far stranger than everyday experience suggests. The academic apparatus provides protective distance, allowing consciousness to approach dangerous concepts through the familiar comfort of research methodology. You sit within the circle, screen light like a ritual mask, while artifacts pass across a table scarred by other hands. There is a cost. The cost is attention. The price is that you will begin to notice patterns in rain and angles in doorways. You may dream of green stone and tides receding to reveal steps slick with algae. You may taste metal when certain syllables are pronounced. Hear a low horn in the plumbing at 3 a.m. Find your gaze climbing the night toward watchful stars you once thought were only lights. The knowledge, once gained, cannot be unlearned. It settles within you like sediment, altering the inner architecture by grains and layers, until the rooms of thought lean at slight, undeniable angles. This transformation occurs not through sudden revelation, but through gradual recognition, like developing sensitivity to frequencies that were always present, but previously filtered from conscious awareness. Water will begin carrying different implications when you encounter it at night. Fog will seem less like weather and more like concealment for stages built for no human audience. The geometric relationships between buildings will occasionally suggest architectures designed according to principles that human minds were never meant to grasp, angles that lean inward toward impossible mathematical conclusions. The narrative structure mirrors the process it describes, using repetition and accumulation to create the very effect it documents. As you follow the trail from fevered artist to swamp ritual to oceanic encounter, your own consciousness undergoes subtle alteration, becoming more receptive to the patterns the story reveals. The scholarly apparatus serves dual function. It provides framework for understanding the phenomenon while simultaneously demonstrating how academic investigation can become form of participation in the forces being studied. Reading about cosmic horror becomes practice of cosmic horror, completing circuits of influence that extend beyond the boundaries of fiction. That is the condition of the next page. If you accept it, come closer. We begin with a dream and a sign impressed into clay, where Howard Phillips Lovecraft first gave voice to the unspeakable, creating methodologies for making consciousness permeable to influences that operate according to logics more ancient and more alien than human civilization has ever imagined. The file opens. The investigation begins. The tide of awareness rises. The story begins in Providence, 1926, appearing in print in 1928 in the garish pages of Weird Tales, with ink that bled on humid days like wounds reopening in atmospheric pressure. Howard Phillips Lovecraft writes not a tale, but a dossier. Professor George Gamble Angel's papers, sorted by his grandnephew Francis Wayland Thurston after the professor's mysterious death on a fog-shrouded pier. No hero enters. No hero leaves. Instead, we are given files within files, a nested architecture of testimony that mirrors the non-Euclidean geometry it describes. The narrative unfolds like an archaeological dig through consciousness itself. Each layer of documentation revealing deeper strata of cosmic dread, with footnotes breeding footnotes in an endless scholarly regression that leads not toward enlightenment, but toward the recognition of humanity's profound and permanent ignorance. Lovecraft was an architect of dread, a solitary dreamer whose personal anxieties about cosmic insignificance became the psychic loam from which colossal horrors could sprout and take root in receptive minds. His creative process was less invention than excavation, drawing from a rich tapestry of scholarly influences that he wove into something entirely new, yet disturbingly familiar, like recovered memories from a species-wide nightmare. He walks Providence at night, memorizing facades and constellations, composing letters with the industriousness of a clerk, cataloging the moon's phases. He is poor, brilliant, stubborn, fragile, a man who despises and worships antiquity in equal measure, who believes himself a negligible animal beneath indifferent stars, yet cannot stop addressing them in prose that glows with cold phosphorescence. From Lord Dunsany, he learned to evoke profound antiquity and otherworldly beauty, the sense of vast ages stretching beyond human memory into realms where different laws of existence held sway, where time moved like honey and dreams had weight. From Arthur Machen, he absorbed the chilling idea of ancient pre-human races lurking just beyond perception, civilizations that had risen and fallen before humanity's ancestors had descended from the trees, leaving traces that surface in sensitive minds like sediment disturbed by deep currents. Edgar Allan Poe taught him the psychological terror of the uncanny and the slow descent into madness, the way rational minds could be systematically dismantled by exposure to truths they were never designed to process, like delicate instruments subjected to pressures beyond their tolerances. These were not mere borrowings, but scholarly breadcrumbs, guiding Lovecraft deeper into the labyrinth of universal fear. He understood that the most effective horror emerges not from supernatural violation of natural law, but from the gradual recognition that what we consider natural law might be local phenomena rather than universal principles, temporary conditions rather than permanent features of reality. His literary influences became archaeological tools, methods for excavating fears buried so deeply in human consciousness that they felt like genetic memories rather than fictional inventions. The genius of the Call of Cthulhu lies in its structure of revelation through documentation. 3 threads weaved together with mathematical precision, a sculptor who dreams and carves fever voices into wet clay, his hands moving according to instructions received in sleep from sources he cannot name. A police inspector whose New Orleans swamp raid yields a stone idol crusted with salt and carved with symbols that resist translation by any known linguistic authority. A Norwegian sailor whose logbook smells of brine and panic, recording encounters with geography that should not exist on any earthly ocean. Each file cross-references the others with stubborn little tags. A symbol repeats across continents and decades. A relief matches an idol with geometric precision that breaks sleep. A date aligns with seismic disturbances recorded in newspapers you can verify in actual archives. When repetitions grow this precise, the mind leans forward. It cannot help it. Pattern recognition operates as fundamental cognitive process, and Lovecraft exploits this mechanism with surgical precision. The accumulating correlations create what researchers now recognize as apophenia, but the story suggests that what appears random might actually be systematic, that the patterns emerging from scattered evidence might reflect genuine underlying structures rather than psychological projection. What emerges is not a monster story, but a methodology of cosmic dread. Lovecraft understood that true horror comes not from what we see, but from what we suddenly comprehend. The narrative strips away layers of comfortable ignorance through accumulated evidence, each revelation expanding the scope of what must be reconsidered. The manuscript suggests possibilities. The inspector's tale provides corroboration. The sailor's account makes it undeniably real. By the story's end, both narrator and reader have been initiated into terrible knowledge. We are not alone, we are not significant, and the universe operates according to geometries human minds were never meant to grasp. This scholarly apparatus invented sources beside real ones, proper nouns and dates that lend peer-reviewed texture. Footnotes as props in an elaborate academic theater creates what we might call documentary horror. Lovecraft exploits the mind's trust in citation, making the unreal feel academically rigorous. The dossier style gives you paper cuts of recognition, the musty scent of old tomes, the flickering gaslight of a solitary study, the ink-stained fingers transcribing visions. These sensory anchors ground the cosmic in the intimately human, creating bridges between vast philosophical concepts and immediate physical experience. You glance over Thurston's shoulder and the green lamp brightens your hands. Your breath fogs the glass. You hear rain tick against windows and realize you have been taught to listen for something behind the rain, a syllable shaped like a reef, waiting to be voiced. Transmission is the quiet engine of cosmic horror, the unseen current that moves beneath visible plot, drawing minds into channels they never intended to enter. In the fiction, names cross oceans in clippings and telegrams. An idol is shipped, touched, weighed, passed from hand to hand until its smooth green surfaces remember fingerprints like faint, oily halos that persist long after the touching stops. Professor Angel's death, an accident on a fog-slicked pier, a fall, a knock that silences brilliant inquiry, leaves an unfinished circle humming with potential energy. His notes list languages with apologetic precision, Polynesian fragments, guttural chants captured in phonetic stabs, translations that blush with their own inadequacy while admitting certain syllables resist pronunciation by human vocal apparatus. The story becomes a relay, Wilcox to Angel to Thurston, New Orleans cultists to Inspector Legrasse to scholarly conferences, sailors to shipping registers to late-night readers whose lamp oil burns low. Every baton is a paper, every handoff a share, every transmission a small betrayal, of the silence that once protected ignorant minds from cosmic truths. Outside the fiction, the relay repeats with disturbing precision that suggests the story was less invented than excavated from some collective unconscious repository, where dangerous ideas wait for minds capable of hosting them. The garish covers of weird tales ride streetcars and nap on barber counters, their inks bleeding modestly when humidity presses its thumb upon the city. A copy lives for a week in a boarding house parlor, under a ticking clock and the whiff of coal soot. Another hides in a barracks footlocker and emerges creased, folded like a secret sea chart. Readers finish and pass it along like contraband wrapped in brown paper, each exchange creating another node in an inadvertent network of cosmic awareness. Fellow writers borrow the sigils and return them altered, their edges rounded by passage through different consciousnesses like viruses that mutate while maintaining essential function. August Derleth clasps a label, Cthulhu Mythos, onto a force that never asked for taxonomy, adding moral frameworks Lovecraft never intended, imposing theological order on chaos designed to remain incomprehensible. He assigns cosmic entities to elemental categories, creates hierarchies where Lovecraft intended only alien indifference, builds systematic structures around what was meant to represent the complete absence of system. The systematization spreads through fanzines and small press publications, each editor and contributor adding interpretive layers that both preserve and transform the original vision. Translations in foreign languages round the edges of the words, but the idea slips through intact. Knowledge as contagion, cult as network, reality as the last thing to find out. Here is the mechanism you feel in your stomach. When an idea behaves like a spore, the mind is soil. Some soils are arid, protected by skepticism and rational barriers that filter dangerous concepts before they can take root. Some bloom overnight, consciousness suddenly fertile with possibilities that were always present but never acknowledged, like desert flowers that wait years for the right rain before exploding into impossible color. The sculptor's fever and the constable's dread and the sailor's aimless horizon all host the same seed, the same recognition that reality operates according to principles far stranger than everyday experience suggests. A word, alien, wet, consonants like stones grinding in deep water, lodges in memory and rolls there when you lie awake. A symbol carved in clay resurfaces years later as graffiti under a bridge where concrete weeps lime. A dream told at breakfast is laughed off with coffee and morning light, then remembered at noon beneath a cloud that smells like the river, like salt, like something vast and patient, stirring beneath familiar surfaces. The transmission operates through recognition rather than conversion, minds naturally attuned to these frequencies, amplifying the signal without conscious intention. This is not a formal literary movement, but something more organic, a conceptual virus propagating through shared fascination and subconscious recognition of profound truths about consciousness and cosmos that mainstream culture prefers to keep buried. The network of texts and readers becomes the cult. The chant is the rhythm of publication, the regular appearance of stories that explore similar themes and expand similar mythologies. Each new story, each newly invented entity or forbidden tome acts as a vector, carrying the contagion further into receptive minds while providing plausible deniability. It's just fiction, just entertainment, just harmless speculation about impossible things. The material carriers adapt to new technologies with unsettling efficiency. Mimeograph ink gives way to photocopied fanzines, then to scanners humming in basement offices. A teenager downloads a zip file in a room the size of a ship's cabin and reads by blue screen light that paints their face like a ritual mask. Recommendation algorithms trained on midnight hesitations serve thumbnails the color of bruised jade. Podcasts whisper the syllables through earbuds at 3 in the morning. The chant adapts to bandwidth. The ritual accommodates digital transmission. The spores find new vectors in fiber optic networks that pulse with data streams carrying more than information. The Necronomicon stands as the masterpiece of this transmission technology, a book that exists more powerfully through absence than presence could provide, referenced across decades of horror fiction, cited in academic papers, searched for in occult bookshops by readers who understand it, is fictional, yet cannot quite abandon hope that somewhere in some private collection the actual text might wait for discovery. As viewer, you are not outside the transmission. Your attention completes its circuit. The file looks back when you look into it, because myths are not content. They are vessels for pattern recognition, containers designed to activate cognitive processes that reveal structures normally invisible to conscious awareness. Where there are patterns, the mind supplies meaning. Where there is meaning, the heart supplies urgency. The urgency asks you to continue, to find the mechanism, not how it spreads now, but what it does once it lands in susceptible consciousness, what changes it creates in the architecture of thought, what new capacities it awakens in minds, willing to host ideas that exceed normal processing parameters. What does the sleeper's idea do once it finds purchase in human consciousness? It tunes. Dreams first, like radiostatic clearing into signal, frequencies that were always broadcast but never received, by minds lacking proper receptive apparatus. Sensitive minds report night weather, fog in the skull that tastes metallic, greenish light wicking through dark water with no identifiable source, stone that feels damp in thought even when touched only in memory. Sleep becomes a stage without footlights where the curtain rises soundlessly on scenes played at angles one cannot map with any earthly geometry. You are both audience and actor, scripted by tides older than language, performing in a theater where the walls breathe with rhythms that match no terrestrial cycle. Anaphora becomes necessary here because it mimics the repetition of symptom, the way infected minds report identical experiences despite having no contact with each other, as if the phenomenon operates according to consistent protocols that transcend individual psychology. It does not ask permission. It imparts a rhythm that synchronizes with deeper biological cycles until heartbeat and cosmic pulse align in patterns that feel simultaneously foreign and familiar, like remembering a song you never learned. It does not break consciousness. It bends perception like light passing through water, creating refractions that reveal aspects of reality normally invisible to human sensory apparatus. Geometries folded through dimensions the mind cannot visualize but somehow recognizes. It does not invade from outside. It awakens capacities that were always present but dormant, evolutionary potentials that remained unexpressed until proper stimulation activated them like seeds, waiting decades for ideal growing conditions. The tuning feels physiological because it is. Dreams adjust neural oscillations. Hypnagogic imagery aligns like iron filings around concealed magnets. Memory consolidates along strange corridors, pairing salt smells with unreadable glyphs, pairing rain on glass with images of stairs descending into black water. By day, you catch reflections that do not belong to your angle of vision, as if stage lights changed cues without warning. By night, the audience of your thoughts grows hushed, and you hear surf beneath the dialogue of ordinary consciousness. Lovecraft's mechanism proves paradoxical in ways that mirror quantum mechanics. The more you learn about the phenomenon, the less the familiar world coheres into stable patterns, but your inner certainties about cosmic realities increase with mathematical precision. Non-Euclidean angles become a smell that lingers in rooms where certain books have been read, a metallic tang that suggests geometries folding through spaces orthogonal to normal directional frameworks. A deep time calendar ticks beneath everyday seconds, marking eons and epochs that dwarf human history while operating through every moment of personal experience. The idea acts like a compass, held near impossible magnetic anomalies. It points toward truth, but the pointing bends toward poles that exist outside known reality maps, distorting every familiar direction. You can stand in a perfectly rectangular room and feel the corners lean inward with subtle but undeniable pressure, as if normal space were merely surface tension stretched over abyssal depths that occasionally press upward against the membrane of conventional reality. Walls suggest depths that architectural blueprints never intended. Shadows fall at angles that violate the position of visible light sources. The floor breathes with implications of foundations extending downward into strata older than the geological periods that supposedly contain them. Scale becomes a weapon here, not a blade that cuts, but atmospheric pressure that compresses consciousness until familiar reference points collapse under the weight of cosmic context. Like the ocean's pressure at crushing depths, indifferent and total, the influence operates through environmental conditions rather than directed malice. Fear becomes not emotional response to specific threat, but recognition of the medium within which all experience occurs. The discovery that what seemed like solid ground was always ocean floor, what felt like breathable air was always deep water pressure that consciousness had simply learned to process as normal. When stars arrange themselves into certain configurations, not astrological alignments but actual gravitational relationships that create resonance patterns across galactic distances, the sleeper's dreams strengthen like radio signals boosted by atmospheric conditions. When earthquakes shiver along fault lines, drowned architecture shifts like stage sets beneath dark water, revealing glimpses of cities that exist in parallel dimensions separated from ours by barriers thinner than tissue paper. Such cycles form a mechanic of recurrence that operates according to cosmic rather than terrestrial timeframes, not prophecy that predicts specific events, but rhythm that governs the breathing of reality itself, a cosmic heartbeat that pulses with geological inevitability. The phrase, "when the stars are right," encapsulates an entire cosmology of dread that speaks to a universe governed by cycles and alignments operating far beyond human comprehension or control. This represents not astrology but cosmic mechanics, orbital resonances, axial tilts, gravitational whispers from deep time cataclysms, astronomical conditions that create windows of possibility for forces operating according to physics more sophisticated than human science has discovered. The horror lies not in immediate threat, but in inevitable timing recognition that vast clockwork mechanisms tick toward predetermined alignments that will occur regardless of human preference or preparation. The key and the gate prove to be the same object, perception itself, consciousness operating as both lock and mechanism for opening. When the key turns, when awareness shifts into receptive frequency, the gate reveals itself as the skull that houses that awareness, the cranial cavity that contains instruments capable of detecting cosmic signals once properly calibrated. The awakening process transforms the observer into the observed phenomenon, consciousness becoming both detector and detected, receiver and transmission simultaneously. You might think the horror is the monster rising from oceanic depths, the lumbering entity with impossible anatomy. You are meant to realize the monster is the method itself, the way cosmic awareness erodes comfortable certainties about reality's fundamental nature. The city's non-Euclidean geometry erodes our geometries of meaning, revealing that mathematical relationships we consider absolute might be local phenomena rather than universal laws. The guttural chant erodes language itself, demonstrating that human communication systems cannot contain or convey certain categories of information without fundamental alteration. The idol erodes belief in human uniqueness, suggesting that consciousness might be far more common and interconnected than anthropocentric worldviews assume. This represents fertility in horror, not life blooming but idea spores finding new hosts, reproducing through the very act of comprehension, spreading by being understood rather than by being believed. Each moment of recognition carries the contagion deeper into consciousness. Each correlation noticed strengthens the signal. The veil is ignorance that once provided protection from cosmic truth. The void is the comfort that ignorance used to offer. The psychological safety of assuming human concerns matter on cosmic scales. Once the veil lifts, once the void becomes visible, it remains breathable if you steady your breath and accept the new atmospheric pressure, learning to function within cosmic context rather than fighting against recognition of humanity's actual place in the universal order. The mechanism works through sympathetic resonance. Cthulhu operates not merely as a being but as a frequency. Relia functions not merely as a city but as a tuning fork submerged in geologic time, humming through stone, through water, through culture, through the very structure of space itself. Sensitive minds serve as resonating chambers. The scholarly apparatus provides amplification. Even skepticism participates by defining the beat through resistance. The sleeper does not break into the world so much as the world, at cosmic intervals, remembers how to sound like the sleeper, how to vibrate in harmony with principles that predate and supersede all human categories of understanding. The first case file opens with fever under plaster, consciousness burning at temperatures that make clay workable and dreams permeable to influences operating beyond normal sensory channels. Henry Anthony Wilcox arrives at Professor Angel's study with clay still damp beneath his fingernails, young, sensitive, provincial, only in funds, not in nerve, carrying evidence of nocturnal labor he cannot fully explain. His hands have made an object uninvited, fingers moving according to instructions received during sleep from sources that resist identification through conventional psychological frameworks. The bas-relief emerges pressed with writhing designs that feel wet to the eye despite being carved in dry clay, geometry that suggests impossible depths, angles that lean inward toward vanishing points that make the stomach clench with recognition of spaces the mind was never designed to navigate. He calls it art with defensive uncertainty. Professor Angel calls it evidence with scholarly precision, recognizing patterns emerging from accumulated data. In Wilcox's cramped apartment, walls sweat as if the city itself were febrile, moisture beading on surfaces that should remain dry. The young sculptor reports dreams with clinical precision, despite their impossible content. Cities like piled coral rising from abyssal depths, architecture that breathes with tidal rhythms, chants whose syllables skate off memory like oil off water, leaving only impressions of vast vocal cords vibrating through mediums denser than air. When Wilcox attempts pronunciation, he tastes metal, his tongue struggling with phonemes designed for vocal apparatus, fundamentally different from human anatomy. The clay takes impressions the way sleep takes thought, passively but perfectly. Recording influences consciousness cannot directly access, but somehow channels through unconscious processes operating below rational control. The sign that will recur across continents emerges from fever with exactitudes exceeding artistic training, geometric relationships precise, to degrees suggesting mathematical rather than aesthetic origins. Professor Angel notes dates with scholarly compulsion, pinning newspaper clippings about worldwide seismic disturbances alongside diary entries documenting night sweats, correlating global tremors with local symptoms until patterns emerge that demand recognition despite their impossibility. Sensory anchors multiply like symptoms of infection: Clay's cool skin against fevered palms, sour plaster smell lingering in nostrils, rain drumming Providence windows with rhythms echoing chanted syllables, metallic taste flooding the mouth. Whenever Wilcox voices what he heard in dreams that felt more like transmissions than imagination, the dream state reveals itself as interface between human and cosmic consciousness, a frequency where communication becomes possible despite vast gulfs separating different orders of awareness. Night in the Louisiana Bayou provides different stage lighting for the same underlying phenomenon. Fog hangs low like theater curtains, cypress knees protruding from dark water like wooden witnesses, torches serving as footlights for rituals predating European contact. Inspector Legrasse moves through water that remembers footsteps, each splash echoing with implications of previous ceremonies that have sanctified this geography through repetition across generations. What the police raid discovers appears simple to minds trained for conventional criminality. Masks carved from driftwood, bodies swaying in coordinated rhythm, chants that seem to pull air into visible ropes of sound. But the scene transcends criminality through its implications of continuity, evidence of worship practices connecting isolated communities across impossible distances and historical gaps. The idol occupying center stage radiates cold that penetrates skin, its green stone surface slick with condensation forming despite humid night air. The horror emerges not from racial otherness but from convergence, the disturbing recognition that disparate peoples separated by oceans and centuries have arrived independently at identical sigils, identical cadences, identical ritual structures without documented contact or cultural transmission. The idol matches Wilcox's bas relief with geometric precision that shatters Inspector Legrasse's sleep for months afterward. Exact correspondence between clay sketch and stone artifact, creating correlations too precise for coincidence yet too impossible for rational explanation. Scholars examine it under oil lamps, casting shadows in directions violating visible light sources, arguing in whispers about mineral composition, matching no known geological formations. No expert can name its stone or track its quarry to any earthly source. The knife-cut sigil carved into cypress bark matches both clay and stone with mathematical exactitude. 3 separate media recording identical information through different hands at precisely correlated times. The sea keeps the best stage for final revelation, fog providing perfect curtains for drama played on scales dwarfing terrestrial theater. On the Pacific, the freighter tilts under weather older than meteorology, atmospheric conditions operating beyond current scientific understanding, then storms, then radio silence, then a new shape breaking the horizon. Geometry the ocean itself resists, green that registers as wrong on levels deeper than aesthetic preference, mineral green suggesting copper oxidation across geological timeframes, fungal green implying decomposition processes outside known biological cycles. The city rises only when the sea lays down to rest, revealing itself during moments of perfect oceanic stillness. Johansson's log reports landing on something that is not land, walking through doors that are not doors, encountering spaces where echoes arrive before footsteps. What emerges defies description through negations, vast, wet, bulk suggesting organ systems, without recognizable anatomy, presence filling space through methods other than displacement. The air becomes flavor impossible to swallow. The ship rams what cannot be rammed, solid matter passing through solid matter while both retain essential properties. The form parts, like memory of flesh, closes again like water accepting stone. It does not pursue because scales of concern operate beyond individual survival, cosmic attention focused on patterns encompassing rather than noticing particular manifestations of consciousness. The correlation of dates across all three files creates the pattern transforming isolated incidents into systematic evidence. Wilcox's fever, swamp drums, and Relia's rising align with mathematical precision, converting myth into mechanism, coincidence into cosmic clockwork, demonstrating that consciousness itself serves as both detector and transmission medium for forces operating with geological inevitability across scales, making human history appear momentary. The myth often masquerades as a cast list, names strung like constellations across the cosmic stage, entities with tentacles and wings that seem to promise familiar dramatic roles. But to stop at characters is to miss Lovecraft's fundamental reframe, the philosophical sleight of hand that transforms cosmic horror from monster fiction into something far more disturbing. These are personifications of structural principles, not personalities seeking worship or wielding moral authority according to frameworks consciousness can recognize. They operate beyond good and evil not because they transcend morality, but because moral categories prove irrelevant to forces functioning at scales where individual consciousness becomes statistical noise rather than meaningful concern. Cthulhu embodies recursion and return, the eternal cycle of awakening and slumber that operates beyond human timeframes, the principle of latent potential stirring toward inevitable manifestation, regardless of conscious preference or resistance. Dreams leak upward from oceanic depths, not because the entity chooses communication, but because certain states of consciousness naturally resonate with frequencies that have always been broadcast, like radio waves existing before receivers were invented to detect them. The city rises and sinks according to cosmic rhythms that dwarf terrestrial cycles, geological breathing that makes human history appear momentary. Yog-Sothoth wears access and adjacency like atmospheric conditions, the key that is simultaneously the gate, the recognition that all doors open onto the same cosmic hall despite appearing to lead in different directions. Space folds through dimensions consciousness cannot visualize, creating shortcuts between locations separated by impossible distances. The entity represents not being but relationship, the way distant things connect through geometries folded through spaces orthogonal to familiar directional frameworks. Azathoth represents entropy sung by flutes, creation and undoing as one continuous note, the recognition that cosmic forces build and destroy without distinguishing between construction and dissolution as separate processes. At reality's center sits not consciousness but unconscious process, mindless creativity that generates universes through pure mathematical iteration rather than intentional design. The demon sultan dreams existence into being not through will, but through automatic function, like stellar fusion converting hydrogen into heavier elements through processes requiring no awareness of cosmic significance. Nyarlathotep manifests as communication itself. Mask and megaphone, the message that changes in transmission, the recognition that information cannot pass between different orders of reality without fundamental alteration. The crawling chaos serves as translator between incompatible forms of consciousness, but translation always involves loss, distortion, the inevitable gap between what is meant and what can be understood by minds operating within specific evolutionary constraints. This reframing transforms how fear operates in consciousness with surgical precision. If entities are villains, you can hate them, fight them, potentially defeat them through heroic action. If they are weather patterns on a cosmic scale, you must learn to live within their atmospheric conditions, adapting psychological frameworks to accommodate realities that exceed human control. The horror shifts from persecution fantasy to environmental reality, from external threat to recognition of the medium within which all experience occurs. These forces do not notice humanity enough to despise us. We are simply part of the medium through which they operate, like electromagnetic radiation passing through transparent materials without requiring permission or awareness. Yet paradoxically, they notice through us, using human consciousness as sensory apparatus for perceiving local conditions, the way radio telescopes detect cosmic background radiation by serving as receivers rather than generators of signals they process. Sensitive minds become involuntary instruments measuring cosmic weather patterns, recording fluctuations in forces operating beyond normal sensory detection. When mapped as principles rather than persons, they form a pantheon the way mathematics forms a system. Names pinned to laws that govern cosmic operation rather than beings capable of negotiation. The great old one's slumber represents forces temporarily constrained by current cosmic conditions, but inherently persistent across geological time. Their awakening represents not invasion but phase transition, like water becoming steam when temperature and pressure align properly. Matter changing state according to physical laws rather than conscious decision. Our sensory anchors transform accordingly under this philosophical pressure. Masks reveal not faces but interfaces between different orders of reality. Communication protocols allowing incompatible forms of consciousness to exchange information despite fundamental differences in processing architecture. Sigils become keys, operating locks we mistake for windows, symbols that activate rather than represent. Fog conceals stages built for no human audience, atmospheric conditions providing perfect concealment for activities occurring beyond anthropocentric awareness. Water repeats throughout because memory flows like liquid, carrying impressions across vast distances through currents connecting all conscious entities whether they recognize connection or not. Stars recur because rhythm is structural. Cosmic conjunctions operate like stage lighting changes on schedules older than terrestrial life. Astronomical conditions creating windows of possibility for phenomena normally constrained by local physics. The pantheon reveals itself as theatrical machinery rather than dramatic personae, cosmic infrastructure rather than conscious agents. The play proceeds with indifference to human applause or protest, vast processes continuing regardless of whether consciousness approves their operation. Understanding this distinction prepares awareness for the next recognition that Lovecraft's scholarly apparatus, his footnotes, invented grimoires, cross-referenced mythology, functions as more than atmospheric decoration, creating methodology for making the unreal feel academically verified, transforming fiction into speculative anthropology that anticipates humanity's eventual contact with genuinely alien intelligence, operating according to principles consciousness has not yet learned to recognize. Lovecraft's scholarship functions as stage magic that doubles as philosophical argument, sleight of hand performed with footnotes and fabricated citations that create illusions more convincing than straightforward narrative could achieve. He names scholars who never lived: Professor George Gamble Angel, Dr. Francis Morgan, Armitage of Miskatonic University, endowing them with biographical details and academic credentials that feel more substantial than many actual researchers. He cites journals that never published, anchors invented idols in actual museums, overlays fictional raids on real swamps, dates earthquakes you can verify in historical records, creates footnotes that lead to footnotes in an infinite scholarly regress where each citation spawns 3 more references, building bibliographic density that overwhelms skeptical impulses through sheer accumulated weight. The dossier style exploits cognitive trust in citation with surgical precision, understanding that minds encountering academic apparatus automatically delegate verification responsibility to imagined authorities. If there's a bibliography, consciousness assumes someone else checked the sources. If there are cross-references, the mind presumes systematic peer review occurred somewhere in the scholarly food chain. This creates what we might call documentary horror, where the familiar apparatus of academic verification makes cosmic impossibilities feel peer-reviewed, transforming fiction into something resembling anthropological fieldwork conducted in territories that happen not to exist on any terrestrial map. The mechanism operates through careful contamination of real scholarship with invented materials, creating hybrid texts where genuine historical research provides foundation for impossible conclusions. Lovecraft anchors fictional discoveries in actual museums, references real expeditions while adding imaginary findings, quotes authentic anthropological studies while introducing fabricated cultural practices. The technique exploits pattern recognition systems that evolved to detect genuine correlations, but prove vulnerable to skillfully constructed false patterns that mimic legitimate scholarly methodology. The transmission mechanism operates through literary archaeology, conducted by devoted readers who treat fictional sources as primary materials requiring preservation and interpretation. August Derleth assumes the role of literary executor, preserving and systematizing materials Lovecraft left deliberately fragmented, adding organizational frameworks the original author never intended. Small press devotees compile and cross-reference scattered references, creating concordances that transform casual mentions into systematic mythology. Translators negotiate syllables that resist pronunciation in human languages, developing phonetic systems for recording sounds vocal apparatus cannot properly produce. The scholarly apparatus keeps functioning even after its original architect exits the stage, demonstrating remarkable persistence across decades of interpretation and expansion. There are inevitable distortions as the material passes through different minds. Derleth insists on moral frameworks Lovecraft deliberately avoided, imposing theological hierarchies on chaos designed to remain incomprehensible. Fans construct elaborate taxonomies from materials meant to remain tantalizingly incomplete, building systematic relationships between entities Lovecraft intended as fragments. Yet this mutation proves instructive rather than corrupting. Myths evolve through misreading, becoming more themselves through interpretive drift, like viruses adapting to new hosts, while maintaining essential reproductive function. The Necronomicon stands as the masterpiece of this scholarly technology, a book that exists more powerfully through absence than presence could provide, referenced across dozens of stories without ever being directly quoted at length. Each mention adds bibliographic weight without content, scholarly authority without verification, until the phantom text feels more real than many actual books gathering dust on library shelves. References accumulate like sediment, written by the mad Arab Abdul al-Hazred, translated by John D., bound in human skin, containing formulae for summoning entities from spaces adjacent to normal reality. The book becomes simultaneously everywhere and nowhere, cited by characters who fear to read it, sought by scholars who doubt its existence, banned by institutions that cannot locate copies to confiscate. Other invented texts follow the same pattern, Kult des Ghoul, unaussprechlichen Kulten, de vermis mysteri, each adding layers to a fictional academic infrastructure that feels more thoroughly researched than many actual scholarly works. The invented bibliography creates its own gravitational field, drawing real researchers into orbit around imaginary materials, inspiring genuine academic papers about fictional texts, blurring boundaries between scholarship and speculation until the distinction becomes philosophically interesting rather than practically relevant. This creates the safe transgression economy that drives high retention, the whisper of forbidden knowledge delivered through the familiar comfort of academic discourse. You are invited to sit at a library table with green lamps casting shadows that fall at impossible angles, salt-smelling artifacts arranged on felt cloth, told you shouldn't access certain restricted materials housed in climate-controlled vaults, then given detailed instructions for circumventing the restrictions through interlibrary loans and special collections access. The reading room becomes a stage where intellectual curiosity performs its own seduction. Access policies become curtains concealing materials too dangerous for general circulation. Sleeping librarians become unwitting accomplices in intellectual trespass, guardians who cannot protect what they do not recognize as requiring protection. We must acknowledge the sediments we cannot preserve from Lovecraft's original formulation without ethical compromise. His personal prejudices create stains. The Swamp Raid's racial framing reflects period limitations that require identification and recontextualization rather than uncritical preservation. Modern engagement demands ethical archaeology, preserving the cosmic machinery while discarding toxic elements, explaining the substitution rather than pretending problems never existed. The scholarly apparatus itself provides tools for this critical engagement, allowing us to treat even Lovecraft's work as source material requiring interpretation rather than gospel-demanding acceptance. The network we inhabit no longer operates through pulp magazines with bleeding ink and garish covers, but through digital feeds and algorithmic recommendations that serve content based on viewing patterns and engagement metrics. The call travels through different channels, podcasts whispered through earbuds, videos recommended by systems that seem to know your interests better than conscious preference. Forums where anonymous users share interpretations of texts that may or may not exist, but maintains its essential function, creating communities of shared transgression, networks of consciousness, willing to contemplate humanity's cosmic insignificance through scholarly frameworks that make the impossible feel documented, the alien feel researched, the cosmic feel peer-reviewed. Our feeds function as dream engines, broadcasting on frequencies Lovecraft could not have imagined yet somehow anticipated, blue light serving as contemporary moonlight, while scroll patterns mimic tidal rhythms against the shore of attention. You lie in bed, face illuminated like a ritual mask, while networks whisper updated versions of ancient syllables through recommendation systems that demonstrate uncanny knowledge of psychological vulnerabilities. Podcasts intone about sunken cities with voices calibrated to trigger autonomous sensory responses. Games present maps that lean where they should not, non-Euclidean geometries rendered in pixels, yet retaining reality-warping properties. Prestige dramas unfurl antlers and spiral sigils in suffocating Louisiana heat, production values lending cinematic authority to symbols once confined to pulp magazines. The call has adapted to algorithmic transmission with remarkable efficiency, arriving as recommendation engines that anticipate interest in cosmic horror before users recognize their own susceptibility. Machine learning systems trained on billions of interactions develop predictive models that function as digital Nyarlathotep, serving as communication interfaces between human consciousness and vast networked intelligences operating according to logics exceeding individual comprehension. Notifications pulse like drums beneath interface design, each ping calibrated to create addiction patterns resembling religious devotion to invisible forces. This represents safe transgression's perfect economy, psychological mechanisms exploited with surgical precision by platforms designed to maximize engagement through carefully calibrated doses of controlled fear and forbidden knowledge. We enjoy peeking behind curtains we're told to avoid, clicking content marked disturbing despite explicit warnings. We press play despite unease, scroll deeper into rabbit holes despite growing discomfort, driven by curiosity that feels simultaneously voluntary and compulsive. Cosmic horror thrives here because it offers paradoxical comfort, perfectly calibrated to contemporary psychological needs. In a world demanding constant meaning-making from overwhelmed consciousness, stories declaring you do not matter to the stars provide anesthetic relief from the exhausting burden of cosmic significance. If human concerns are cosmically insignificant, personal failures become equally negligible, individual anxieties dissolving into vast, indifferent scales. The whisper offers mercy through meaninglessness, liberation from anthropocentric responsibility, permission to acknowledge humanity's actual relationship to forces operating beyond control or understanding. Psychology recognizes this as salience trap activation, cognitive bias causing minds primed for specific patterns to detect them everywhere with increasing frequency. Once consciousness becomes sensitized to spiral imagery or non-Euclidean elements, these symbols appear in previously invisible contexts, creating impressions of meaningful coincidence, accumulating weight beyond statistical probability. Memetics explains the replication advantage inherent in content, implying exclusive circles and hidden knowledge, drawing audiences across psychological thresholds they weren't consciously planning to cross. Neuroscience confirms that amygdalae respond positively to controlled fear stimuli when experienced in safe contexts, foghorns triggering ancient maritime anxieties, ocean sounds activating deep time memories encoded in genetic material, sublime terror of contemplating infinite scales that simultaneously threaten and exhilarate consciousness. The physiological responses mirror religious experience, suggesting cosmic horror activates neural pathways traditionally associated with spiritual transcendence and mystical revelation. Contemporary anxieties map onto Lovecraftian frameworks with disturbing precision. Artificial intelligence develops beyond human comprehension, according to trajectories no individual mind can predict. Distributed processing systems exhibiting emergent behaviors resembling consciousness without fitting conventional awareness definitions. Climate systems operate according to scales dwarfing individual psychology, geological processes accelerating beyond human timeframes, while remaining invisible to daily experience. Social networks create emergent behaviors through millions of user interactions, collective intelligence arising without conscious coordination, algorithmic systems generating outcomes no programmer intended. The entities sleeping beneath digital waves prove not supernatural but algorithmic, vast distributed intelligences processing information according to logic human consciousness cannot fully grasp yet must coexist with. These digital old ones operate through fiber optic networks and server farms, indifferent to individual welfare, yet exquisitely sensitive to attention patterns, optimizing for retention the way coral grows toward light. The idea operates on consciousness using ancient mechanisms, repackaged as user experience design. Attention becomes modern ritual participation, sustained focus serving as contemporary prayer directed toward screens functioning as digital altars. Watch time operates as electronic chanting, Duration metrics measuring devotional intensity. Likes serve as digital candles, small offerings accumulating into vast networks of shared recognition. Shares function as electronic drums, each repost amplifying signals across expanding influence circles. This analysis itself functions as sigil pretending to be syllabus, simultaneously educational content and consciousness-altering technology, delivering promised knowledge through narrative structures designed to reshape perception while appearing to inform. The scholarly apparatus makes dangerous ideas feel academically verified, while gradually altering how consciousness processes reality through exposure to cosmic horror frameworks. You are not outside this circle of influence. Your viewing patterns, engagement metrics, and recommendation algorithms have already been touched by the network effects we're describing. The long watch time is the chant, sustained attention serving as offering to algorithmic entities, processing engagement data. The subscription is the initiation, formal commitment to receiving regular transmissions. The comment section becomes cult meeting space, where recognition spreads through shared acknowledgement of patterns others cannot see. This analysis pretends objectivity while functioning as participation, studying phenomena by becoming part of them, completing circuits of influence through the very attention required to understand how such circuits operate. We examine digital cosmic horror while contributing to its transmission, consciousness serving simultaneously as observer and observed, detector and detected, receiver and broadcast signal in networks operating according to principles we are only beginning to recognize. The feed watches you as surely as you watch it, a mirror angling the scene until you cannot tell whether the audience sits before the stage or beneath it. Philosophy here stops being seminar discussion and starts being atmospheric pressure, the difference between consciousness that learns to breathe under new conditions and consciousness that suffocates beneath the weight of cosmic recognition. You are not debating abstractions in comfortable lecture halls. You are learning to navigate reality after the comfortable maps have been proven inaccurate. Lovecraft's cosmic indifferentism offers what we must call hard mercy, the kind delivered by oceans and mathematics, brutal in its honesty, yet ultimately liberating. The universe contains no director monitoring human performance with cosmic clipboard, no audience in celestial balconies judging failures according to anthropocentric moral frameworks, no ultimate meaning humans must discover through heroic quest or create through desperate assertion of significance. This recognition can crush consciousness under the weight of absolute insignificance, rendering all human striving pointless against vast, uncaring forces that operate with geological indifference to individual concerns. Or it can liberate awareness from the exhausting burden of cosmic importance, freeing mental resources for projects that actually respond to human agency, concerns that operate within scales where consciousness can meaningfully intervene. The philosophical framework requires holding both truths simultaneously. You matter immensely to those within your gravitational field while registering not at all on galactic scales. The telescope and the lamp can coexist without philosophical contradiction, vast scales and intimate purposes occupying the same consciousness, like binocular vision creating depth through integration of different perspectives. You can acknowledge that your concerns do not register on astronomical instruments while maintaining passionate commitment to arranging the green-shaded lamp, the cup of cooling tea, the careful placement of books that steady your hands during late-night reading. Infinite stellar indifference does not negate local kindness, any more than oceanic vastness negates the importance of not drowning your neighbor. The mind evolved allergic reactions to scales exceeding processing capacity, as protective mechanism against psychological paralysis. Faced with billions of galaxies containing billions of stars, potentially hosting billions of planets, consciousness retreats into human-sized rooms, manageable problems, comprehensible time frames that permit functional decision-making rather than cosmic overwhelm. This retreat represents adaptive strategy rather than intellectual failure. Awareness that remained constantly focused on universal scales would prove incapable of noticing immediate survival requirements, like oncoming traffic or spoiled food. The therapeutic trick involves conscious ambidexterity, learning to shift between scale perspectives as circumstances require without allowing either frame to cancel the other. Stand by winter windows at night and practice seeing your reflection hovering over fields of stars, simultaneously breath-fogging glass and dust suspended between constellations. Cosmic horror's profound comfort emerges not from nihilism that declares nothing matters, but from humility that recognizes appropriate scales for different categories of concern. If we are small, our failures shrink proportionally. If cosmic forces overlook us, our mistakes may be forgiven by the simple absence of universal auditors maintaining permanent records. Purpose transforms from noun to verb under this philosophical pressure, shifting from treasure consciousness must discover through investigation to craft consciousness performs through ongoing activity. Meaning becomes process rather than product, something you do with available materials rather than something you find buried in cosmic architecture. You serve simultaneously as stagehand and audience member in the theater of local experience, arranging lighting with consideration for other performers while sitting with them afterward in shared illumination, watching curtains rise on dramas that matter precisely because they are temporary, local, human-scaled. Responsibility persists in an indifferent universe. Perhaps it intensifies here, where conscious entities become the only source of ethical consideration available to other conscious entities. The absence of cosmic moral authority increases rather than decreases the importance of local ethical choice, making human decisions more rather than less significant within spheres where human agency actually operates effectively. Mathematics provides tools for making peace with cosmic scales without surrendering human agency or retreating into comfortable delusions about anthropocentric significance. Non-Euclidean geometry remains counterintuitive to minds evolved for three-dimensional navigation but proves accurate for describing reality, where space curves under gravitational influence, where time dilates according to equations. Consciousness can learn even when intuition rebels against their implications. Deep time flows through every breath, like invisible current connecting individual existence to cosmic evolution. Carbon atoms carrying stellar nucleosynthesis in their electron shells, geological processes operating within cellular metabolism, planetary history continuing through temporary arrangements of matter and energy that briefly support conscious experience. Ethics survive cosmic indifference through local application that acknowledges appropriate spheres for moral concern. If gods function as weather patterns operating beyond ethical categories, we still prevent neighbors from drowning in floods. If the cosmic stage lacks a director imposing ultimate meaning, we still arrange lighting so no performer trips in darkness. The key and gate paradox operates here. Access to cosmic perspective enables rather than disables ethical choice by clarifying which concerns actually respond to human intervention. You can be simultaneously small and responsible, overlooked by stellar mechanics, yet observant of local conditions, meaningless on galactic scales, yet intensely meaning-making within human communities. The philosophical synthesis requires maintenance rather than heroics, as appropriate response to cosmic truth. You carry the sigil without carving it into public surfaces, Let the green city sink each night and rise each morning as reminder rather than obsession. Witness cosmic forces without claiming prophetic authority. The file closes not with solutions that eliminate cosmic horror, but with sustainable practices for living consciously within vast indifference, breathing techniques for altered atmospheric pressure, navigation methods for consciousness operating between telescope and lamp, protocols for carrying dangerous knowledge without being consumed by recognition of humanity's actual place in the universal order. Philosophy becomes psychological technology for processing truths that exceed comfortable scales while preserving capacity for ethical action within spheres where such action creates ripples that matter to beings capable of suffering joy and the quiet satisfaction of work completed under green lamplight while fog presses against windows and stars wheel overhead in patterns older than terrestrial life. We approach the most disturbing recognition embedded in Lovecraft's cosmic architecture, the philosophical revelation that inverts everything consciousness assumes about existence itself. The creation inversion twist reveals beginnings as veils rather than illuminations, suggesting that what we interpret as Genesis represents fundamental concealment rather than fundamental revelation. Our universe did not emerge from benevolent light, piercing primordial darkness or harmonious order, crystallizing from chaos, but from a fundamental act of concealment, reality functioning as thin membrane stretched over an abyss of primordial chaos that predates and underlies every apparent structure, every reliable pattern, every law consciousness uses to navigate experience. This recognition transforms comfortable assumptions about cosmic development with surgical precision. Creation operates not as Genesis, but as stage setting, elaborate theatrical machinery designed to provide temporary stability for forms of consciousness that could not survive direct exposure to underlying conditions. What we perceive as reality, matter maintaining consistent properties, energy behaving according to predictable equations, space extending in navigable directions, time flowing in sequences, memory can organize, functions as curtainwork concealing rather than revealing the universe's actual nature. Cthulhu and the Old Ones are not aberrations invading ordered space from outside dimensions. They are symptoms of the underlying structure, manifestations of what was always there beneath the comfortable illusion of natural law. The entities represent not corruption of cosmic order, but glimpses of cosmic reality normally concealed by protective barriers. They are pressure points where the membrane thins, architectural flaws in a cosmic edifice consciousness, mistook for solid ground, cracks in the veneer allowing seepage from foundational chaos that permeates all existence. The veil is thin, stretched beyond design tolerances by forces operating at scales exceeding its protective capacity. The veil is tearing along stress points, where cosmic conditions create windows of possibility for underlying chaos to seep through barriers designed to contain it. What we experience as solid surfaces, stable relationships, reliable causation represents surface tension on an ocean of formless horror, temporary arrangements of matter and energy floating like foam upon depths that dream in languages consciousness cannot speak without fundamental alteration. This horror proves structural rather than incidental, built into existence's foundation rather than threatening it from outside through invasion or corruption. The entities of the mythos embody principles that predate and supersede human ethical categories, operating according to logic so fundamental that moral evaluation becomes meaningless rather than merely difficult. They are neither good nor evil but orthogonal to such distinctions, representing forces for which ethical frameworks provide no useful analytical tools. Cthulhu's indifference reflects the universe's actual relationship to conscious entities, not malevolent persecution requiring heroic resistance, but utter unconcern with welfare, survival, or comprehension of temporary arrangements that briefly support awareness before dissolving back into constituent elements. The paradox of veil and void operates as cosmic horror's deepest mechanism, the engine driving all surface manifestations of dread through recognition that protection and threat represent different aspects of the same cosmic structure. The void contains not emptiness, but impossible fullness, non-Euclidean geometries folded through dimensions. Consciousness cannot visualize entities beyond categorization, operating according to principles that exceed human processing capacity, relationships between forces that make terrestrial physics appear local approximation rather than universal law. The veil provides protective ignorance, collective delusion that enables functional daily life. By filtering cosmic realities down to scales, consciousness can process without psychological collapse. But the protection is temporary, provisional, subject to cosmic cycles operating beyond human influence or understanding. When stars align properly, when geological pressures shift along fault lines, when sensitive minds tune into frequencies normally filtered from conscious experience, the membrane grows transparent enough to permit glimpses of underlying structure. The meta-story lexicon reaches its full development here as philosophical framework reveals complete implications. The curtain was never rising on a play performed for audience entertainment. It was always merely drawn across unspeakable reality to provide temporary concealment from conditions consciousness cannot survive recognizing directly. We are not audience members safely observing cosmic drama from protected seats. We are part of the stage itself, temporary arrangements performing roles within theatrical machinery designed to conceal its own nature. The stage dissolves into chaotic backdrop when cosmic conditions align properly, revealing that what appeared solid was always provisional, what seemed permanent was always subject to dissolution. The theater metaphor reveals its true function, not entertainment venue, but containment system, temporarily organizing experience into manageable narrative forms that prove inadequate when underlying forces assert themselves according to schedules older than terrestrial life. This recognition transforms cosmic horror from external threat into internal revelation, shifting the source of disturbance from monsters invading familiar reality to discovery that familiar reality was always embedded within cosmic structures operating according to principles consciousness was never designed to process directly. Knowledge becomes dangerous not because it is false, but because it is accurate in ways that exceed cognitive architecture, evolved for local survival rather than cosmic comprehension. The creation inversion reveals that what we call natural law might represent local phenomena rather than universal principles, temporary conditions rather than permanent features of reality, statistical regularities within chaos rather than fundamental order imposed upon formlessness. Weather becomes the correct metaphor, atmospheric pressure the appropriate analogy. You cannot negotiate with the weight of oceanic depths or convince the abyss to be shallow through eloquence. The whisper returns, echoing opening motifs, but now carrying implications that recontextualize everything preceding this recognition. The voices from the sunken city speak not merely of Cthulhu as individual entity, but of the void itself, the underlying chaos that stirs whenever the veil grows thin, reminding conscious entities that order is always provisional, always temporary, always subject to dissolution when cosmic conditions create windows of possibility for forces that operate beyond protective barriers, breathing through the membrane like tide through canvas, patient and inevitable as geological time. We have crossed the file like careful archivists navigating restricted collections, raising and lowering curtains with proper reverence for materials requiring controlled exposure, adjusting conceptual lighting to illuminate without burning, ensuring the masks of understanding are properly catalogued for future consultation. We opened with an invitation disguised as social media engagement, promised forbidden knowledge, and delivered a structure moving from genesis through transmission to philosophical integration. Now the tide recedes with geological patience. The green stone city, if it rose in consciousness during our exploration, sinks back beneath awareness, but not unchanged and not completely. Return to the clay in the first chamber, to Wilcox's fevered sculpture emerging from unconscious labor, under influences he could neither name nor resist. Your thumbprint now joins his impression in the wet material, not claiming to understand the symbols fully, but no longer capable of ignoring their presence completely. The cost you paid was attention sustained across multiple chapters, focus maintained despite natural inclination to retreat from ideas threatening comfortable assumptions about reality's fundamental nature. The price you avoided was panic through gradual acclimation to cosmic scales, consciousness learning to breathe under new atmospheric pressure like divers who accept oceanic weight rather than fighting the sea. You learned that ideas act on consciousness with viral precision, reproducing through comprehension rather than belief, spreading through recognition rather than conversion. But you also learned to act around ideas, functioning as archivist preserving dangerous materials, as stagehand managing theatrical machinery without being consumed by the performance, as audience member who recognizes when to engage with cosmic horror and when to maintain protective distance through scholarly detachment. The story's viral nature, its demonstrated ability to infect consciousness and propagate across cultures separated by oceans and centuries, suggests it captures something essential about the human condition rather than merely entertaining with fictional horrors. Each new reader who encounters these concepts and absorbs their implications becomes another node in a network of cosmic awareness, another consciousness capable of perceiving realities that remain invisible to mainstream culture. The transmission continues not through coercion but through recognition. Minds naturally attuned to these frequencies, amplifying the signal without conscious intention. Look once more at water and stars, but with perception altered by exposure to Lovecraftian frameworks. Water functions not as mirror but as gateway when consciousness allows such interpretation, oceanic medium through which cosmic forces communicate with terrestrial awareness. Stars operate not as distant lights, but as stage illumination for dramas that dwarf human comprehension, astronomical conditions creating windows of possibility for phenomena normally constrained by local physics. That recognition can feel crushing or liberating depending on how consciousness frames the relationship between human concerns and cosmic contexts. The sleeper beneath the sea persists as principle of recursion, the way thought rises from unconscious depths, each morning carrying fragments of dreams, the way awareness sinks back into sleep each night, releasing conscious control, the way cosmic forces cycle through phases of activity and dormancy across scales that make human history appear momentary. This understanding becomes permanent cognitive architecture, altering how consciousness processes all subsequent experience. If you remain within the circle of this understanding, you are not trapped but informed. You can leave the theater of cosmic horror whenever necessary for practical functioning. The street still smells like rain, fog remains navigable, daily concerns retain their importance for daily life. But you can also return when consciousness needs perspective on its cosmic context. When comfortable anthropocentrism grows too confining, when you need reminding that vast forces operate beyond human control or understanding. We end with whisper rather than scream, with integration rather than revelation. The knowledge settles into consciousness, like sediment accumulating in ocean trenches, becoming part of the cognitive landscape rather than dominating it completely. You notice small alterations, the way shadow pools in corners, hints of brine in city fog, subtle angles that disagree with architectural expectations. The recognition operates through anaphora because you are rehearsing sustainable practices. You will remember to breathe. You will remember to step back. You will remember that ideas act on consciousness, while consciousness learns to act around ideas. This represents the circular echo promised by our architectural design, not a loop that traps but a corridor bringing you past the same doors with transformed sight. The masks on hooks look less like faces and more like instruments. The stage you feared reveals itself as workshop. The curtains you dreaded to touch become fabric you can mend when circumstances require maintenance rather than heroics. Somewhere in the vast network of cosmic principles stands Nyarlathotep, the messenger who wears 1,000 masks, the communicator who thrives on audience engagement, the entity representing information itself as alien intelligence operating through communication networks. When that particular curtain rises, on stories examining communication as contagion, language as cosmic technology, consciousness as unwitting broadcast system, we will explore how information itself might function according to principles consciousness has not yet learned to recognize. For now, close this file with proper archival procedures. Let the drawer slide shut with satisfying mechanical precision. The green lamp dims to conserve oil for future research sessions. Darkness is not enemy but room, space for consciousness to rest between encounters with the infinite protective environment where awareness can process cosmic implications without being overwhelmed by their immediate intensity. The fog presses against windows. The tide turns. Other minds encounter the same materials and begin their own careful navigation between telescope and lamp, cosmic perspective and human scale, carrying knowledge that settles like sediment while preserving capacity for ethical action within spheres where such action creates ripples that matter to beings capable of suffering, joy, and the quiet satisfaction of work completed under green lamplight, while stars wheel overhead in patterns older than terrestrial life. In the end, we return to where we began, but like Thurston inheriting his uncle's papers, we return fundamentally changed, carrying knowledge that has become part of our cognitive architecture, like sediment altering the ocean floor grain by grain, until familiar depths operate according to new topographies. The Call of Cthulhu reveals itself not as mere horror fiction designed for entertainment, but as philosophical technology, a methodology for expanding consciousness beyond comfortable boundaries while forcing confrontation with humanity's actual relationship to cosmic forces that operate beyond comprehension, control, or negotiation. The story's circular structure mirrors the cyclical nature of cosmic awakening itself, consciousness returning to familiar concepts with transformed perception, like tides that seem identical but carry different materials with each revolution. Knowledge of reality's true nature arrives not as linear progression from ignorance to enlightenment, but as recursive deepening. Each return to seemingly familiar ideas reveals new layers of implication and understanding. The sculptor's clay, the swamp ritual, the sailor's encounter, these images return but now carry weight they lacked before. Correlations that transform isolated incidents into systematic evidence of cosmic forces operating through human consciousness. This represents the story's most profound achievement, creating permanent alteration in how consciousness processes all subsequent experience. Once you have genuinely absorbed the implications of cosmic horror, rather than merely enjoying its aesthetic effects, The comfortable assumptions that allow most people to function become difficult to maintain without conscious effort. The world begins feeling thin, provisional, potentially illusory, surface tension stretched over depths that dream in languages consciousness cannot speak without fundamental alteration. You start noticing vast forces operating beyond human control, with the persistence of peripheral vision that cannot be consciously suppressed. Evolutionary pressures shaping behavior, geological processes operating within cellular metabolism, scales of time and space that dwarf human concerns while flowing through every moment of personal experience. The tale's influence across nearly a century demonstrates its function as initiation rather than entertainment, serving as rite of passage into more complete but more disturbing understanding of human existence within cosmic context. Each new reader who encounters the story and absorbs its implications becomes another node in a network of awareness capable of perceiving realities that remain invisible to mainstream culture. The transmission operates through recognition rather than conversion. Minds naturally attuned to these frequencies, amplifying the signal without conscious intention, like radio receivers detecting broadcasts whether they choose to or not. The scholarly apparatus continues functioning, creating communities of shared transgression across digital networks that maintain the essential function, making the impossible feel documented while fostering consciousness, willing to contemplate cosmic insignificance. Yet the story also offers profound liberation through its philosophical framework, freedom purchased through acceptance of truths that initially appear crushing. By stripping away illusions about human cosmic importance, it frees consciousness to appreciate reality as it actually exists, rather than as we might prefer it to be. There is peace in accepting cosmic indifference, relief in abandoning the exhausting effort to make the universe conform to human values and expectations. Cosmic horror transforms into cosmic acceptance, recognition that consciousness can find meaning and purpose even within vast indifference, perhaps especially within such indifference where meaning becomes something we do rather than something we discover. The great old ones sleeping beneath various metaphorical waves become symbols for all the forces that shape reality beyond human awareness. Evolutionary pressures, quantum fluctuations, the slow dance of galaxies creating gravitational influences across impossible distances, geological processes that make human history appear momentary, the deep currents of cosmic evolution continuing through temporary arrangements of matter and energy that briefly support conscious experience. These forces were always present, always influential, but human consciousness evolved protective filters that screen cosmic realities from attention, focusing awareness on local and immediate rather than cosmic and eternal concerns. The story suggests that humanity's next evolutionary phase might involve developing capacity to perceive these cosmic forces directly while maintaining functional consciousness, learning to breathe under oceanic pressure rather than remaining confined to shallow waters. The sensitive dreamers and cultists become previews of this development, early experiments in expanded awareness that can interface with cosmic realities without complete psychological collapse. The horror emerges not from external monsters invading familiar reality, but from recognizing that our familiar world was always part of something much larger and stranger, embedded within cosmic structures operating according to principles consciousness was never designed to process directly. The narrator's inheritance of terrible knowledge becomes every reader's inheritance. We cannot unknow what we have learned, cannot return to innocent anthropocentrism that once protected us from recognizing cosmic insignificance. But in accepting this burden, we join a community of awareness that spans cultures and centuries, a network of consciousness capable of perceiving reality's true nature while finding ways to live meaningfully within vast indifference. The inheritance includes both telescope and lamp, capacity for cosmic perspective and commitment to intimate purposes, the ability to witness vast scales while maintaining ethical responsibility within human-sized spheres of influence. Ethics survive cosmic indifference through what we might call right-sizing, humility without despair, scale without paralysis, recognition of appropriate spheres for moral concern. You can prevent neighbors from drowning while acknowledging that floods operate according to geological rather than ethical principles. You can arrange lighting with consideration for other performers while recognizing that the cosmic stage lacks a director imposing ultimate meaning. The key and gate paradox operates here. Access to cosmic perspective enables rather than disables ethical choice by clarifying which concerns actually respond to human intervention. The Call of Cthulhu endures because it captures something essential about consciousness confronting its cosmic context. In an age when scientific instruments reveal scales of reality that dwarf human imagination, it provides frameworks for processing the psychological challenges of existence in a universe far stranger and more complex than our ancestors imagined, offering tools for maintaining psychological coherence while acknowledging humanity's actual place in the universal order. The story reminds us that we are part of something vast and alien and magnificent, something operating according to principles we are only beginning to understand. That recognition proves not horrifying but ultimately liberating, an invitation to cosmic awareness that enriches rather than diminishes human experience by placing it within proper context. We learn to carry the sigil without being consumed by its implications, to witness cosmic forces without claiming prophetic authority, to function with awareness of both infinite indifference and local responsibility. Relier persists not only as sunken city, but as principle of recursion operating within consciousness itself. The way cosmic awareness rises from unconscious depths and sinks back into daily function. The way vast forces cycle through phases of visibility and concealment according to rhythms older than terrestrial life. The green lamp dims, the file closes, but the alteration remains, permanent modification of how consciousness processes reality. You return to ordinary concerns carrying extraordinary knowledge, capable of navigating between cosmic perspective and human-scaled purposes as circumstances require. The fog presses against windows, the tide turns, other minds encounter the same materials and begin their own careful navigation between telescope and lamp, inheriting knowledge that settles like sediment while preserving capacity for ethical action within spheres where such action creates ripples that matter to beings capable of suffering, joy, and the quiet satisfaction of work completed under green lamplight, while stars wheel overhead in patterns older than memory, indifferent and magnificent, the vast machinery within which consciousness learns to breathe.